Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I think it was a half an hour ago. We were on the Mama Genius podcast. Now I'm back with Rachel Ken. I'm so excited to have her because she's just a goodness of information about how do we get that sense of belonging, which is really essentially what we all want as human beings. So I'm just going to bring down my description of her so I can read a little bit more. So she's the owner of Vitality Source. And I love how she describes herself: a mom, nerd, athlete, organizational, and individual development coach and consultant. She combines her passion and experience with helping individuals and organizations grow and thrive. She brings professional expertise in individuals and leadership coaching, HR strategies, employment experience, talent development, positive psychology applied to individuals and organizations, and sustainable change. The expertise comes from over 20 years of experience in both the corporate world and the auto industry and tech startups, as well as individual coaching, nonprofit consulting, and community leadership. She is just a wealth of information that we're going to learn so much more from today. Her podcast will be live later this week on Wednesday, I believe. I'm losing track of all my days, but it's coming out this week. And so she'll be episode 5, I believe. Or is yours out already? I don't know. I lost track of my
Lots
mind.
of good stuff. I think it's coming later.
Take it away, Rachel. Oh, wait. Do you see some viewers? So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. We'd love to answer your questions as well. But take it away right now, Rachel.
Yeah. So, thinking about belonging, right? So I know we have had multiple conversations about belonging. So when you think about like belonging for moms specifically, right, in your audience, right, what do you think are the top questions or the things that the struggles are?
Well, I really feel like it's really they're looking for that, but they just feel this sense of isolation because they're like keeping themselves. I mean, our society kind of like puts it this way where we're like in our individual houses or individual cars now, and then like we got to put this effort in to like get together anymore. And that effort sometimes as a new mom or even a stay-at-home mom or even with the elementary kids, it's like you're too busy shuffling all the components that you're like, how do I even have this feeling? I have this need for it, but no idea where to go to even find it.
Right, right. Or like you're with other moms, you're with people, you try to have friend time, and then you're wrestling kids the whole time, and you're
Like,
like, did I
like,
even talk to anyone?
and then you're like, you're in mid sentence, like, oh, I gotta go.
Yes. Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been there, and you wonder like, does anybody actually know who I am? Like, I spend so much time around all these different people, but does anyone know who I am? Do I know who I am? And how do I actually connect? Right. At a
Right.
deeper level where people see me. And it's a challenge. And I think part of that is that we grow up with this assumption that we create belonging by having lots and lots of time together, which it can be true, but that's so challenging as a mom, right? And especially when your kids are younger. So when you think about that, like understanding that belonging is not necessarily tied to time, it will be eventually, but it doesn't have to be, right? Because belonging is about being seen, about being heard, about being valued and feeling like you can contribute. There are things that we can do to kind of accelerate that process, right? So, like, you think about in your own life, have you ever had an experience where you met somebody and there was just like this instant connection and you didn't spend very much time with them, but you felt like they saw you, right? Can you think of an example?
Well, I can think of more, especially now. I mean, even when I met you, even at Parliament, I felt like I was just having these instant connections, like, and like all these people that I've been speaking with and speakers and stuff, and they're just like, you're all of a sudden like it feels like you're on the same wavelength, and you're just like, all right, let's do this and have these deep conversations. But I don't feel that with everyone. All of a sudden, you're like kind of feeling that out, like, can I ask that person that question, or am I going to offend them, or do they not want to go that way? And then
Right.
there's other people where you're just like, let's go, we're diving in.
Right, right. Yeah. And some of it is that willingness, right? So to create belonging, we do have to get to a space of there's a little bit of willingness for vulnerability, right? And it doesn't have to be like share your deep, dark secrets. It doesn't have to be that. It's just sharing a piece of who you are, right? So when I think about belonging, one of the key things is starting with sharing stories. And we're not always really good at that, right?
Yes.
Number one, because maybe we don't know what our story is and we're not sure. We talked a little bit about that other times, right? But also sometimes we don't know how to share that story. Like, how do I actually help someone to understand what my story is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like when you think about sharing your own story, you've talked about like number one, who am I, and getting to that, right? What was that process like? Like, what did you have to do in the process of figuring out who you are?
It was more like, oh my gosh, like I don't, what is that? How did I even get here? And then it's
Mm-hmm.
like, do people even care? Like, is this even relevant to anyone else? And all these
Mm-hmm.
thoughts just come in my head, like, yeah, no one's gonna want to know that. And then it stops me from like creating that story because I'm just like, oh, no one cares.
Right. Yep. So we do have to say, hey, I have something to contribute, right? Am I going to believe? Am I going to be willing to be vulnerable to share my story? Because it is vulnerability. When I share that story, I'm going to say, if nobody reacts to it, then of course I'm not worthy, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
enough. What I have is not enough. So I'm not going to share it anymore, right? So for me, when I think about, especially with women, one of the major things that we can do is to realize that belonging, sometimes we think belonging is about shifting power, right? And bringing people in to
Mhm.
have power who don't have it. But it's not about redistributing scarce power in existing structures, right? It's really about deciding that we can have more power together. It's not scarcity, right? It's
Mm.
about creating more together. And so when we have that mindset shift, we begin to say, not how can I get the power of belonging, right? Like you need to make me feel like I belong. It becomes, how can I co create belonging with you, right? And it shifts our mindset to look outwards rather than saying, you need to provide that for me.
Well, it's funny because actually, in the last interview I just did with Janine, we were talking about co-creation. And the idea of that, that's really what this is about, is going away from the construct of like that expert in top of the room. And we got to get all this information from that expert. And then we got to disseminate it and figure out for ourselves. But then when we share in these co-creation elements of actually having that deep conversation, we're all the leaders and we're all making something together. And that energy just shifts because of the power of putting our minds together and understanding rather than judgment.
Right. Yeah. And so the concept of belonging and how do we create belonging, in the end, what we're looking for is co creation. It's everybody saying, I have something to contribute. And everybody else saying, yes, you do. You have something to contribute. Let's figure out what that is. How can we do this together? Right. And so the two pieces of it that are really important is, will I share my story? Will I take that step of trusting my story to someone else? But on the other side of, how do we respond to someone sharing their story?
Ah, the response. Yes, I love
Right.
that.
Because I have to honor that story. And it doesn't mean I have to agree. It doesn't mean that I have to have the same perspective or the same experiences, but I do need to honor that that is their story and that I have something to learn from it and they have something to contribute with that story, right? So even
Mhm.
just in our daily lives, we can practice this a lot. You think about at home with kids, with husband, with anybody in your life, right? um, Even just friends. There is a way that we can respond to people that's called active constructive response, right? And you think about this of, what do I do when someone shares, especially a joy, like something they're happy about with me? And there's four different ways that we can respond. And it's really just basically kind of a quadrant of, it's either active or passive, right? And it's either destructive or constructive. Okay. And you think about this, I always think about with my kids because I always do like the worst one with my kids, right?
Of course.
Just how it is. And so you think about when they come and they're really excited about something, right? And they come home
Mhm.
and they're like, I learned this and this happened and this happened. And guess what? I want to build this. What happened the other day? I want to build this huge art project, right? I have this vision of what I want to do. Okay. And usually my immediate kind of gut response is, oh no, what does this mean for me? Right.
I've been there.
Okay, what am I going to have to do? So I start responding either in a passive way of kind of just putting it off, right? Like not really acknowledging it and hoping that they forget,
Mhm.
right? Or I respond in an active way of, let me tell you all the reasons why that won't work, right? But
Mhm.
both of those are destructive. And it takes that joy and that idea that they were sharing with me and just deflates it, right? And so I'm not allowing their joy, their contribution, what they want to do to really enter the space, right? Now, it doesn't mean that I have to do exactly what they want, right, on the other side. But what could that look like? If on the flip side, I do an active, constructive reception of what they're giving me, It's, I ask them questions. I say, oh, that's interesting. Like, what do you think that would be like? What would you have to do to get there? Right? Do you have to learn how to do something first? Or what would be some problems there? What do you think about that? Like, how do we actually go and do that? I start exploring the space with them and trying to understand what their vision is, what they think that looks like, all of that. So instead of deflating their joy immediately, because I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do this, right? I
I've never
actually,
done that.
right? I start exploring it with them. And
Love
what that
that.
does is it expands their joy because they feel seen, heard, and valued. But we actually also then get to co create a how can we actually do something, right? Because they're naturally going to go into all the, oh, yeah, well, maybe we can't do it all today, right? Maybe we need to break it up into chunks and all those things that are the things that I want to tell them. They will get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that response of expanding someone's joy is one of the things that we can do with anyone, not just our kids, right? When we have a friend who comes and maybe they have something they really want to share and it's not something that really resonates with us, they're still sharing a piece of themselves, right? So can I stop and can I dig a little bit deeper and ask questions and say, oh, that seems like that's really important to you. Like you're really excited about it. Why are you excited about it? What is so meaningful to you about that? And what are you most excited about? Right. And where do you think that's going? And it really is just asking those questions and letting their place in this space of belonging expand. Right. It doesn't mean that I have to do it all, that I have to even be involved, that I have to agree with them, anything. All I'm doing is creating a space for their contribution, their story to really expand and be there and be allowed to be there. Right.
I love that so much because it's talking about the expansion of it all rather than, I mean, like, especially as parents, we're just our gut reaction. Oh no, do I have to do that? What do I have to do? But like, just it's, you have to have that conversation with them, and that expansion of the conversation doesn't necessarily mean you have to do the project, but like, or giving them the tools to like, maybe by that conversation, the next step, oh, well, they got to go look something up and read a book on it first or something. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, now they're off doing that and they're out of your hair anyways. But I just love that because we're so busy. Like sometimes like, what does it mean for me that we just shut that down? And then we don't realize how much we've deflated their joy and their creation, what they're doing. We didn't even have to do it that way. I
Right.
love that.
Yeah. And we do it on every scale of community, right? So we do it in our families, we do it with friends, we do it in neighborhoods, we do it in big scale society, right? Where our initial reaction is, I'm going to disagree and try to shut that down because it feels uncomfortable, or it feels like I can't do that, or it's going to interfere with something that I want, right? So when we're talking about co creating the space of belonging, it's not saying that we're all going to agree initially, but it's saying we're going to make space for everyone and really dig into
Mm-hmm.
understanding where someone is and why that's important to them. And in that process, what happens is we find connections that we wouldn't otherwise have found, right? So maybe my kid comes to me and says they want to build this big art project, right? And I'm like, oh no. But then we start walking through all the possibilities. And I realized there's something else that we wanted to do anyway that could be part of, right?
Yes. I'm just, my eyes were like lighting up because I'm just seeing that. But it's just that constant idea. I mean, I would just have it. Oh, it's been a long day. I'm going to take a break. What I was thinking is I was having conversation about women's circles as well, because that's another aspect of co-creation in terms of the conversations that you're having, but even in terms of just the way that it branches out into the way that you respond and react to other people. Because we're seeking for understanding rather than what it means to me, then we're like encouraging their joy and then enlightening our curiosity, which we didn't even realize. Because most of the time we're like, yes and no, these are the answers, this is going to happen. Oh, well, it came to me with this idea. I'm just, no, that's not going to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
that leading with understanding and curiosity, no matter what it is, whoever comes to you, and to really just. So on that note, what are some tips? Because I mean, we're not. A lot of us are just not like we lost, like we don't have that programming to do that automatically. So what are some tips to like start that process? Because I know it's going to be intentional right now, as we're like not, it's not ingrained in us right now to do that for the most part. So what are some tips that we should start with to actually like do that?
Yeah, and one of the biggest obstacles I think that we have is the reason we don't do that is because we're so focused on task, right? In our society,
Mm.
especially here in the US, and especially as women, we are often overwhelmed by task and things to do and just space in the brain. And so we get caught up in what is the next thing, and we got to get all of these things done. And and I don't know that that's going to go away right away, right? So it's not about adding this as another thing to do, but it is about saying, when are the moments that I have an opportunity to do this that I'm perhaps missing, right? With anyone, right? So I can think about my friends and say, when am I talking to my friends and communicating, and maybe I have an opportunity to do this, but I was distracted by task and I'm just moving on, right? Same thing with my kids. When am I most likely? What are the triggers of when that usually happens, right? And then figuring out for yourself, how do I remind myself in that moment where it's most likely to happen to pay attention and to watch for the things that they want to share, right? And then just spend 1 minute, right? You start with 1 minute. I'm going to spend 1 minute where I spent nothing before doing this, and wanting to listen and to dig in, right? It doesn't have to be like this 30-minute conversation. We don't have to start there. So those two things, right? Identify the where and the when with specific relationships, and commit to having just a 1 minute of practice. And then, it always helps for me to go back at the end of the day or at the end of the week, whatever frequency, and say, how did it go? Right? Was I successful? Was it the right time that I picked? Or were there other times? And you think back and help to identify, where else might I make this a habit, right? Because it really is about integrating it to the things that I'm already doing. Sometimes, like, I know for myself, in the beginning, I started to think, okay, now I got to create like all this one-on-one time with my kids to have these conversations. That's not what it is, right? It's like we hop in the car and they're like, oh, Mom, guess what happened today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that that's a moment when they're sharing something and sharing a joy, sharing an idea, and be willing to take 1 minute and say, oh, tell me more about that, right? And that 1 minute is going to have a huge impact beyond just that 1 minute, right? As I do that consistently in various spaces with them.
I want to pull out that one phrase where you said, tell me more about that. I think that is such a key phrase to put into our vocabulary to erase some of the other ideas that like our natural instincts, and just instead of responding with your reaction to it, just always use the words, tell me more about it, and lead with understanding. Because I think just using those four words more naturally in our vocabulary as someone approaches us, we will learn so much more. And half the things that we were thinking was about to happen, they had no intention of even doing in the first place.
Yeah.
Is what I'm starting to notice.
Yep.
So I want to, there's a deep question inside of me that I've been having, and I'm asking everyone who's on the podcast now, because it's this idea, and I think it's kind of stemming from what you just were talking about. It's this idea that we always say that we're busy, and we have this busyness inside of us. And so a lot of times when someone asks you how you're doing, you always respond, I'm busy, blah, blah, blah. So I'm asking, because I don't have any answers, I'm asking everyone that comes on just for new ideas to open the conversation to, how do we change that? What are some ways when someone says how you're doing that we don't respond with just the words, I'm busy? Because I feel like that's starting to define us as society, especially what you're talking about with the co-creation. That's limiting that creation because we're just like task, task, task.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of it has to do with the way we tell our own story. If everything is focused on task, and our story is all about task, then we aren't really getting at the story of who we are, what's important to us, and what we want to do with that, right? So when we work on belonging, we go through storytelling, but then we also move to values, right? And we ask people to identify what are the most important values to them and how are they living those out? Because it is about, is what I'm doing every day connected to the things that are most important to me? And I think that's part of the reason we don't often know how we are, because we're like, why am I doing all the things that I'm doing? I know I'm busy, but I'm not quite sure overall how I am. Right.
That's fiercely.
Right. Yep. So it is taking that time for self-awareness of what is most important to me. And then I can more readily answer that question of how am I? So for example, when I think about how I am now, I think about one, okay, mental, emotional capacity, physical capacity. That's one level of self-awareness, right? And we're all pretty good at saying I'm really tired. Like I know when I'm really tired, right? But the other next level is what I'm doing contributing to the things that I really care about? Because then it becomes the conversation of, yeah, maybe I'm really tired. Maybe I do need to take a little break of recovery. but I also know all these things are contributing to this that really matters to me. And so at the same time that I'm tired, I really am great and we're thriving. And it's not just the physical tiredness that describes how I am, because I know that I'm doing something that matters to me. Right. And we often miss that linkage. I know, especially when my kids were little, it was hard to make that link, right? Because it was like, do diapers really matter? But if I implicitly or explicitly made that link, it was much easier to feel like I knew how I was doing, right? And respond to that question.
I love that so much. I see, I'm getting so many ideas. I'm just trying to branch that out there and get that, because it's funny because in my marketing, I'm like, busy mamas, like what are you up to? And it's like calling them out, because that's how we identify ourselves. But I want to, even though I'm calling them out because that's what it is, I want to start trying to change that. And so getting some new wording for this is so exciting, just because I think that's the start, is identifying it, and then what can we do to change it. And then on that note, as you were talking, one of the other things is, again, since this podcast is all about finding your genius and getting inside of it, how do you define that? Or how do you feel like what do you feel like when you are in your genius?
Oh, well, that's kind of a big question, right?
I don't put them easy for you. Sorry.
Well, so I love, within positive psychology, there's a whole different framework of how we know if we are thriving and what well-being is, right? Many times we define kind of being in our genius and thriving as I feel happy, but it encompasses a whole lot more than that, which also encompasses those moments that are really hard. And those moments can be leading to thriving if we understand them in the context of the whole. So the framework that I use is called PERMA. There's lots of great resources out there, but it really describes the fact that it's all about, positive emotion, the role of positive emotion versus negative emotion. It's about relationships that we have. It's about whether we're engaged in the things that we're doing every day. If we have meaningful goals and meaningful things that we're looking for to do in our lives. And then accomplishment, not in the sense of achievement, because that's what many of us do, especially in the US. Like, I just got to keep going. Accomplishment means that what I do every day really matters.
I love that definition.
Right.
I'm sucking that in.
And so looking at that whole is one of the big things that we can do to say, where am I in all of these aspects, right? What am I kind of missing if I don't feel like I'm thriving? It's not just that I'm happy in the moment, but do I have positive emotion? Do I deal with negative emotions? Do I have relationships? Do I have meaning? Do I have engagement and accomplishment? And by monitoring ourselves in that way, rather than just the emotion I feel in the moment of am I happy or not, gives us a better picture of am I thriving? Am I growing? Because we're going to have all of the negative and hard stuff too. That's just part of being human, right? And so when we chase just the not feeling the pain, we actually end up not thriving, is the cool thing about it. So recognizing that shift can help us as we move forward. I don't know if that totally answered your question, but that was the thing that came to mind.
Well, you gave the broad answer. I just want to get a little bit narrow. And like, for you though, as a person, like, what do you personally feel when you're in that, what you call genius state for you?
Yeah, for me, it's, I know who I am, and I know what I'm doing, and I might not know how I'm getting there, but I know that I have the resources and the places to turn to figure it out.
I love how you said that, because I think a lot of us get stuck in the how, and we get limited by like, how are we going to get there? And everything that I've been reading and doing right now is like, we got to release those hows, and like you said, be resourceful about how we're going to get, not about asking and getting out there and finding the answers, because you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to have the vision and get led there, and release the hows to what's going to come in front of you, like having these conversations with you and finding all of that in front of us. Oh, it's so inspiring. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the fact that this is at the core of belonging, is the assumption that I don't have to have everything. I don't have to know everything. I don't have to know how to do everything. I don't have to create everything myself. Well, all I need to do is bring what I have. And if I create a space of belonging, we will do more together than I can do alone. Right? So it's this big puzzle piece that we're just putting together, a big sphere of possibility.
So it's funny though, I'm going to have to play just that one sentence you said right there for my son, because he was just like, Mom, I hate working group work. Why do I have to work in groups? And I'm trying to explain the concept of like more minds and stuff, but I just didn't do as beautifully as you did right there. And I'm like, this is what Rachel says. This is why you have to do it. And we have to learn how to do it. I'm like, and I was trying to explain, you might not like the groups you have at school or something, but you will find groups where you feel that. But no matter what, this is the practice of how to do that and opening up with understanding. But it was just like, he's looking at me going, no, Mom, you're crazy.
Well, and it doesn't mean that it's easy, and it doesn't mean
No.
that there are uncomfortable times, right? I mean, we're going to have conflict sometimes, right? But are we committed to doing more together? We will find our way through that, right?
I totally agree. So the word co-creation is just on my heart right now. And I just see the power in it in any way that we can do it, in seeking with understanding rather than trying to judge and tell people what to do. It's like, why are they doing it? And it sounded so brilliantly with the kids when you were just saying how we need to ask more questions and just use the words, tell me more. Just stop yourself from whatever else you were to say and just go to your kid, tell me more. If you have nothing else to say, just use those words instead of what you thought you were going to say.
Right. Well, yeah, and it works with the group work too, right?
Yeah.
You can tell your son, have them ask questions. So ask questions. And the other key thing that really helps is express appreciation. Even if you disagree, I love what you're thinking there. Let's explore that a little bit more, right? Like, what do you think about this? Well, what about this? How would you deal with this, right? Express appreciation for what they are bringing, and they will bring even more, and you'll actually find a way together.
I mean, it really does come back to appreciation and gratitude is when we are instead of worrying about what we don't have, but relishing in what we do have. And we are bringing that forth and bringing that out of the other people too, because we're so negative about how we respond to people. But when we start getting those compliments, because one of the things I like to say at the end of a lot of podcasts I've done in the past is just that, especially as women, I know there's lots of women that walk by and I'm like, oh, I love her dress, or I love her hat, or she just has a nice thing. And the compliment just lives in my head. And so my goal as I do this is like, let's share those compliments and the smiles I get just from it. And sometimes it's led to other connections. But at the very least, it's like this genuine connection of like, oh, and then you just like have a different energy as you keep doing it. And again, all of this is practice because we're ingrained to like go more negative. But as we keep doing this, and you're saying as you learn to do the more questioning and stuff, instead of feeling those first thoughts, and just pause them for a second and go, tell me more, and do that we can do this. I am so enlightened by our conversation today. Are there any final words and tell people how they can get a hold of you and as we wrap it up?
Yeah, well, so they can always get a hold of me. Easiest through my website, probably www.myvitalitysource.com. Or on LinkedIn. I know you have the social media stuff, right? But
yeah, it'll be posted in the notes.
The biggest thing for me is recognizing and the power of connecting in women's circles and all the work that you're doing is we often think that we have to compete. And it's the competition that drives the scarcity, that drives the disconnection, that drives shame, that drives all of the things that we struggle with all the time, right? But power and potential does not come in comparison to other people. It comes with other people, right? And so it's in finding how we do more together, the co-creation, like you said, that we find that power. So it's amazing what I've seen happen when people do that.
Well, I have one last quick story since you inspired in me. I was at my youngest daughter's parent-teacher conference, and we were talking about the kids in the room and stuff. And I look at Lily, I go, you know, the only one person you compare yourself to, don't you? And her teacher looks at her and goes, we were talking about different kids. She's like, what kid was she comparing herself to? Who's she supposed to compare herself to? And she was just like, I'm so intrigued to know the answer to this. And I look at Lily and she kind of like mutters it. So I say a little bit louder. I'm like, the only person you compare yourself is you yesterday. And are you feeling better today? And then her teacher's like, I like that answer. But like she thought it was another student in the room. And I was like, no.
Yep. It's true. Right. We have this habit, and there's many reasons for that, but the way we break that is to foster that connection rather than the competition.
And just say, am I working to be better than I was yesterday? And comparing that only. On that note, well, I thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. And I will see everyone else, I think, in about 20 minutes or so.
All right. Thanks.